Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and this time week 174, Tank Corps Unleashed, the Battle of Cambrai. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you could join the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Yeah. Hold on, I got a string. I'll have to take it off my sleeve here. I got a complaint to make about YouTube here. All right, partners. Now and then, I gotta do a rant here at the beginning of the Great War videos. They're one of the videos that I can get away with doing this because so few watch this in comparison to the other videos. And actually, the Great War series ties into this a little bit. This year may be the first year of me doing YouTube where I do not reach 1 million views. Excluding 2020, but I didn't 2020 I was only there for like the last 6 months, right? I started July 1st, 2020. And right, yeah, 2021 I think 1.4 million 1.2 to 1.4 million was what we got in 2021. 2022, it dropped to like 1.1. Right now, as of the end of October, is sitting at around 800,000, which is like, why is this happening? I don't understand why it's happening. And before anyone's like, because sometimes I see these comments, people coming in here and being like, fucking loser, been doing this for 3 years and still barely not even at 10,000 subscribers yet. And it's like, it's not my fault. It's not. Don't think it is. I don't know what I could be doing any differently aside from maybe editing these a bit more professionally. But I don't know how much that would fucking help still, because statistically speaking, my videos this year, at least within the first 24 hours of upload, have been doing better than all of my other years, right? Like the growth, technically, the growth in terms of average viewership within 24 hours, average viewer retention, and average click-through rate have, in terms of click-through rate, roughly stayed the same, but it's gone up a little bit actually recently. But in terms of average viewer duration and average viewers within 24 hours of upload, those numbers are averaging higher than they ever have before in all my other years of doing this. And so I don't understand why that is not translating to my videos getting put into recommended feeds. I don't get it. It's something like, what am I, like, at that point, at least based on what YouTube publicly says, goes into deciding whether or not it gets put on people's recommended feeds, there's nothing else I can do because I'm doing, right? Like, I had, like, if we look at the videos of mine that are, over 30,000 views, they have, like, there's nothing different to them than all my other videos. Why did those get put onto the recommended feed? And then why haven't the only video I've had get put on like the recommended feed noticeably this year was the Potential History Girls on Panzer series, for mainly the first video of that series. That one shot up to like 30,000 views in a month. And then before that, it was all the way back in January with Salmonella's Animal Kingdom tier list thing or whatever. What do you want from me? I don't know what you want, YouTube. What do I gotta do? Yeah, like what? Like, numerically speaking, based on what you say is important to getting on the recommended feeds, I should be getting on recommended feeds. If my previous numbers are anything to go by, and you put those videos on the recommended feeds, why not these? What the fuck? Now, I understand why the Great War series doesn't, but the Great War, the last like 10 last few weeks or so has actually been doing pretty good. Has actually been doing statistically pretty fucking good. Uh like there was a period from like week 100 to week 160 or something like that where majority of this series has been a slog in terms of viewership. But really in the last few weeks, I've been seeing like getting up to 250 views within like 24 hours or so on some of these, which is really good for this series. So, like a very good average viewer duration. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I really don't. So, anyways, let's talk about the Tank Corps being unleashed.
We've seen them on battlefields, alone, in groups, or even by the dozen, but we've never seen them fight by the hundreds. Tanks, tanks, and more tanks.
Woo!
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the British Army continued its advance in Palestine, though its 3.5-month offensive on the Western Front, the Battle of Passchendaele, came to an end with casualties in the hundreds of thousands. The October Russian Revolution continued, with teenage cadets fighting and dying against the Bolsheviks, and when the former prime minister fled, it was the final end of his government. This week's star, as I said, is tanks, and we saw them at the Battle of Cambrai. The triple belts of wire were crossed as if they had been beds of nettles, and 350 pathways were sheared through them for the infantry. The battle began at 6 a.m. November 20th, with a preliminary barrage of 1,000 guns and 6 infantry divisions of the British Third Army, supported by 9 Tank Corps battalions. According to the Tank Museum Bovington, there were 476 total tanks and 300...
What is going on here on the top of the tanks? Looks like just sticks of wood? Like sticks of wood. Bundles of sticks. Hi. What? I don't... What?
Total tanks, and 378 of them were fighting tanks. 324 of these were used in the opening attack. This was the first time in history such a large tank force was used. There were also 300 supporting aircraft, more infantry, and 3 cavalry divisions.
It's so crazy when you think of these numbers of like this being a massive, tank battle, which still like 300 plus tanks, I think is still, even if we were to look at numbers from World War II, that would still be a still fairly sizable offensive with tanks. I think obviously not like massive in terms of what World War II sees, but like I'd say in general pretty sizable still in comparison to World War II. But like, of course, continuing on with the point, like 300 supporting aircraft, all these numbers and stuff, and it's like you hear this number and you're like, wow, that's a lot. And then you go to World War II and you're like, wow, that wasn't a lot. That's a lot. It's like the amount that tanks and aircraft just skyrocket from here to World War II, just 30 years later, 25-ish years later, like, insane.
Were in reserve. The successes were huge and immediate. They broke through the Hindenburg Line in places nearly 10 kilometers deep. The British managed to reach the woods on Bourlon Ridge and the Bapaume-Cambrai Road that day, taking some 4,000 casualties and over 4,000 prisoners. But a full 180 of the tanks were already out of action, destroyed, broken down, or ditched. The Mark IV tank had some serious issues. Even that day, just at Flesquières, German artillery knocked out 39 tanks and stopped the advance in the sector. One German, Unteroffizier Kluge, reportedly knocked out 7 tanks by himself, working his gun alone until he was shot. He is the only German soldier in the First World War to be mentioned in British military dispatches. There is a certain legendary quality to that story, but however many tanks Kluge and company knocked out, they were with the German 54th Division, which had undergone specific anti-tank training and had faced French tanks during the Nivelle offensive. The next day, a fresh German division arrived from the Russian front and was rushed forward into the line on the Saint-Quentin Canal, where a British breakthrough seemed possible. This ruined the next phase of the British plans, which was in fact a cavalry breakthrough. On the 23rd, news of the initial breakthrough was made public in Britain. The British papers called it the greatest British victory of the war. They rang the church bells throughout the land, the first time they had done so far during the war. But that day,
They're so desperate for a victory, man.
even with all the elation at home, the tide of battle turned in a violent confrontation at Bourlon Wood. British Commander Sir Douglas Haig had insisted that the wood be taken so they could renew the wider plan of attack. He suggested that the cavalry, whose initial task was to exploit a tank break,
He's so fucking obsessed with the cavalry. Haig, stop. Please.
through, dismount and fight as infantry. They did, supported by 100 tanks, but they could not take the high ground above Bourlon, and the German counterattacks were successful and even recovered 100 of their captured guns. So the week came to an end with the heavy fighting at Bourlon Wood still in progress and the British unable to push ahead. But something big came from Cambrai. Generals on both sides saw that tanks, properly deployed, could have a big impact in battle, particularly in breaking through supposedly impregnable barbed wire. Though the combined use of artillery, infantry, tanks, and aircraft, which was in play here, certainly had more impact. And the Germans learned to deal with the tanks fairly quickly. In A World Undone, there's a record from a German lieutenant about it. Some of the boys discovered they could stop the tanks by throwing a hand grenade into the manhole at the top. Once this was known, the boys realized there was a blind spot, that the machine guns couldn't reach every point around the tank. I was shocked and felt very sorry for those fellows in the tanks because there was no escape for them. Once a man was on top of the tank, it was doomed to failure. There was also more
I feel like that's still pretty much the same. It's just that nowadays you're not going to be able to get close to a tank.
news from the east, in Russia. On the 19th, the Bolsheviks asked for an immediate armistice on all fronts. On the 21st, they dismissed Army Commander-in-Chief Nikolai Dukhonin for refusing to negotiate an armistice. That day, Lenin authorized frontline troops to negotiate peace with the enemy, and at the end of the week issued a decree to further disband the army. Now, in Petrograd, the British and American embassies had not been attacked in the revolution, but they had been basically cut off from the outside world, telegrams, mail, and couriers being blocked by the Bolsheviks. This week, as the ice and snow of winter began in earnest, 35 Americans, along with many members of the Red Cross who had simply quit because of the horrors of the past 2 weeks, boarded the Trans-Siberian Railway heading east. For the British colony in Petrograd, however, Leon Trotsky refused exit permits because of the arrest and imprisonment in England of 2 Bolsheviks for spreading anti-war propaganda. In Moscow, the fighting had been bloodier than in Petrograd. The officer cadets there were forewarned about the fate of the Petrograd cadets last week and took strong defensive positions in the Kremlin. It took 10 days and a death toll in the thousands to beat them, and those that surrendered were victims of horrible atrocities. As for that immediate armistice, new French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau responded that his policy is war, nothing but war.
Love it.
Also, the following day, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George had some serious words for President Woodrow Wilson's emissary, Colonel House. See, American Army leader John Pershing's hope of having 1 million trained American soldiers in France by the summer of 1918 was not looking so good. Recent calculations had reduced that number to 525,000 by May. But the U.S. didn't have the shipping tonnage to supply and feed them all, and possibly wouldn't until 1919. There had been logistical incompetence. Some American supply ships were reaching France with less than half their cargo space being used. Lloyd George told House, "I should put the facts quite frankly to you because there is a danger that you might think you can work up your army at leisure and that it does not matter whether your troops are there in 1918 or 1919. But I want you to understand that it might make the most vital difference." Still, the British were advancing without great losses in Palestine at the moment. By the 19th, they'd reached the hills of Judea and are 10 kilometers from Jerusalem. General Edmund Allenby's army had made good advances, sure, But he did have to rein in and reorganize his forces. And the Ottomans' Yildirim Army Group, or Thunderbolt Army Group, that had been diverted from Mesopotamia to Palestine, was not only German-inspired and trained in, among other things, stormtroop tactics, it was led by none other than Erich von Falkenhayn, who seems to be absolutely everywhere this war. Falkenhayn now had the rank of Mushir, or Field Marshal, in the Ottoman army. His counterattacks in late November against Allenby's men failed, but he was preparing to face off against Allenby over Jerusalem. One other thing that he and other German officers would do over the winter, that I'll jump ahead and mention now, was help prevent Jamal Pasha, in his capacity as governor of Greater Syria, from carrying out the forced removal of Jews from Palestine. Jamal had ordered the evacuation on much the same lines as the Armenian genocide. There was a single death of note in the Middle East this week. Okay, 2 weeks ago, British General Sir Stanley Maude routed the Ottomans at Tikrit on the Tigris, taking lots of war material. Even with the Russian army collapse and revolution freeing up a lot of Ottoman troops for attacks on Maude's forces, they were still in good position. They had extended their supply lines, so they now had a truly modern transport system from Basra to Baghdad. Irrigation and flood control measures had managed the river flows. Marauding Arabs on communication lines had been quelled by pacification and slaughter. And the campaign had pushed ever further up the Tigris, Euphrates, and Diyala rivers. But this week, Maude died of cholera. Sir William Marshall took over command, and Maude's final instruction was, carry on. And the week ends with fighting in Palestine, a plethora of tanks at Cambrai, the Russians demanding an end to the fighting, and down in German East Africa, a force of 1,000 Germans and Askari surrendered to the British southeast of Chivata. You know, it might not seem like it, but in several ways, this was a pivotal week of the war. Obviously, the large-scale deployment of tanks, but also the evolving use of combined aircraft, infantry, artillery, and tanks. This is a big part of modern warfare, and we haven't seen a whole lot of it so far in the war, but the Allies are starting to put it together. But it might be too late. Russia asked for an armistice, and it looks like they're going to leave the war, which would free up thousands upon thousands of German troops to head west. And the US troops don't seem like they're going to be there in time for that. What could the British do? Well, they would just have to do as Maude instructed on his deathbed: carry on.
And
if you want to learn
more
more about the British Tank Corps at the Battle of Cambrai, check out our episode from the Tank Museum Bovington right.
And that was Tank Corps Unleashed, the Battle of Cambrai, the Great War, week 174, with a ramble about YouTube from me at the beginning for 5 minutes. But yeah, this was a good episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.